out here.
G'day guys, we're back. It's been a hot minute, and today we're going to talk about a Ford Performance Vehicles BA GT, which is my own personal car, and how I went from a 14-second factory car to an 11-second aspirated stick shift car. It's a whole lot of fun, and I'm keen to show you. Hopefully you enjoy it.
So I purchased this 2005 BA GT by Ford Performance Vehicles in standard form in 2017. It's fitted with a 5.4 litre quad cam modular V8 of the same family of engines existent in post-2000 Mustang Cobras, SVT Cobra R and Ford GT supercars. This particular GT had a middle muffler replaced, but otherwise completely stock standard. From the factory, these cars tend to be a little sluggish off the mark with their long gearing and 1800 kilo plus curb weight. Fortunately, they had excellent power in the upper RPM band thanks to its excellent cylinder heads and intake manifold design. We took this stock standard BA GT to the drag strip at Western Sydney International Dragway. After a few 14.2s at 103 mph, we pulled the airbox lid off and were rewarded with a 14.0 at 105.3 mph. It's worth mentioning that I was struggling with traction this night, and a 60 foot could have been better with a 2.38 60 foot. The next modification was a move away from the factory 3.45 to 1 diff ratio to a more acceleration friendly 411 diff ratio. This meant the gears were shorter, but torque to the wheels was greatly increased, netting us a huge performance gain. It's the way these cars should have come from the factory. Moving on from here, I was looking to utilise the high RPM breathing of the quad cam Boss 290 V8, which means we needed to lift the factory rev limit from the paltry 6,000 RPM or just under to 6,700 RPM, which is what I considered safe at the time. This not only allows us more time in gear to accelerate at full potential, but when we shift, we are no longer dropping out of our effective power band like the factory car would, shifting just under 6,000 RPM. This led to a much more effective use of the power that we did have. We also added a plenum spacer to lift the factory plenum off and away from the intake manifold bell mouths. This allowed a more uniform breathing between cylinders due to less shrouding of the bell mouths, as well as reduced cylinder-to-cylinder reflective wave interference. We also saw a slight reduction in intake air temps on the data logs. However, I would attribute most of this to the idle low airflow conditions and possibly the reduction of heat conduction into the IAT sensor due to the plenum spacer's phenolic material's inherent lack of conductivity. At this point, we also deleted the factory airbox with the addition of a Perspex heat shield just to keep the hot engine bay air where it should be and not in my intake. In hindsight, I probably should have just grabbed a Blue Power intake. I fitted them to a few 5.4s now, and they're just easy and they sound great. Equipped with these modifications, we took the GT back to the strip for testing, resulting in a best of 13.003 at 109 mph, so close to that elusive 1299. The limiting factor for me at this point was the factory clutch and its inability to be slipped for long without completely losing its bite while launching the car. This resulting in the need to bog the car down, which obviously led to poor 60-foot times. A good friend of mine, Terry, from Detailing by Terry, who is now located in southeast Queensland, organised me a nice single plate 380 kilowatt rated MPC clutch and a lightweight billet flywheel based off his past experience. This alone netted me a 12.7 at 110 mph. Most of this due to the ability to modulate the RPM on launch, but also the reduction in reciprocal mass would have played a small factor too. At this point, we were still running the factory headers and catback exhaust, which proved to be less restrictive than you would think. At this point, the old 5.4 boat anchor, as they say, was able to compete or even outpace near-stock Barra-equipped FG XR6 turbos and even the odd near-factory F6. I believe this car has an intercooler and an intake on a stock tune with a ZF Auto. Here's a few runs. I was starting to see some potential. The Boss 290 was surprising me and a few people who saw a set of BA taillights too. Next was the addition of a set of Hurricane stepped headers. These offer a 1 3/4 inch primary, which soon steps to a 1 7/8 and then into a 3-inch collector. These give you the best of both worlds on NA 5.4. The two differing primary pipe sizes offer the engine two opportunities for wave tuning as well as anti-reversion properties of the internal lip at the pipe expansion point. You will see the multiple torque peaks on the dynograph here as the reflective wave tuning does its job. This is a good illustration of why one size does not fit all, and the intake and exhaust design will dictate where you can harness this energy. Our job is to maximize the work that can be done in that small 1500 to 2000 RPM band of operation. And just listen to them sing. From here out, the gains were harder to come by and required some thinking and more tuning to get the most out of the setup. We got sneaky and performed some old school hot rodding techniques that would be familiar to the hardcore guys watching this, with some of us who like to spend money only where it's necessary and not just for the sake of it. We set about half shafting and porting the factory 75mm throttle body, and you can see this technique performed on my AU XR8 with back-to-back gains in my recent video. At this point, I was down to things like altering the temperature that the high and low speed thermofans come on and off to keep coolant temps down, reducing the time the AC compressor clutch stays engaged at wide open throttle, as well as the thermofans to reduce parasitic loss. Adjusting the max throttle angle in the tune so it actually reached 100%, injector firing angle, anything I could do to be faster than the next guy. We went back to the strip, and this is where things got interesting, where the channel really began to gain traction. On this night, the air was extremely favourable to going fast. The air density, which is directly proportional to power output, was equal to that of minus 550 feet below sea level. We saw plenty of 12.4s and 12.5s before reeling off a really nice 12.3 at 112 mph against a 550 wheel horsepower supercharged Miami powered GT Falcon, which is essentially a Gen 1 Coyote with a supercharger for those who aren't familiar. This stirred the pot a little within the Ford V8 community here, as very few naturally aspirated 5.4 Boss GTs had been giving their supercharged Coyote-based successors a good run for their money. It's not to say they hadn't gone this fast before, a handful of guys had. It was just less covered on social media at the time. And needless to say, we're all impressed by what the Aussie 5.4 could muster up at a 4,150 pound race weight, and this is with the passenger and rear seats removed. Moving on from here into summer. The next round of upgrades consisted of 25% underdrive pulleys. Be sure to do your research when looking for the correct items, as I have tested the PowerBond unit to over 8100 RPM with zero failures, but I have heard of other brands causing all pump failures. At this point, I noticed on the data logs that I was starting to pull vacuum within the intake plenum above 6200 RPM. Essentially, this is an easy way to tell that the engine's airflow demand is exceeding the intake's ability to supply it. So we opted for the Yellow Terra lid, which further deshrouds the intake and provides a means to adapt the Ford Racing GT500 or Boss 315 twin 60mm throttle body. This allowed full atmospheric pressure to feed the intake demand and eliminated the restriction through an increase of approximately 27% flow area. We returned to the strip, although instead of minus 500 feet air density, we were now seeing 3,500 feet above sea level and struggled with 38 to 40 degree ambient temps all afternoon. However, this wasn't a wasted effort. We saw consistent 12.6s at 110 mph without the water methanol injection turned on, and consistent 12.4s at 112 mph using the water methanol injection. I made this kit in-house. It's not a bad gain for the $300 or less that I spent on it, returning a 0.2 second and 2 mph gain. This testing was achieved going one run with the water meth on and the next without, over 5 runs. Repeatable data is important. It's how we continue to improve. I don't believe the water meth kit to be adding power alone, but the ability to keep the intake air charge cool meant the ECU didn't enable safety corrections to the base timing map. We keep all our timing and stay consistent like it's a nice cool day. Now things began to get serious with the purchase of some really nice cams from Crow Cams here in Australia. Equipped with more lift than you would generally see on a 4-valve head, coming in at 540 thousandths, with some serious duration in the range of 240 at 50 at the valve. These sticks really are a nice thing for the guys that want to take it to the next level of what a street car should be doing. To the LS or 2-valve head guys, these cams may not seem so big, but a huge advantage of the 4-valve heads is in the rate of valve curtain area exposed at a given lift. If you compare a factory LS1 intake valve exposed curtain area at, say, 200 thousandths valve lift to a 5.4 Boss head, you have just over 45% more available area to move the air into the cylinder at that given moment. This is not to say that a well-designed LS1 head can't match it at high lift, but as the valve is opening, there is a huge advantage to the 4-valve head. Once we get into the pointy end of things, it more or less evens out. The 2-valve heads just need a lot more aggressive valve acceleration, which reduces longevity. So we set about dialing these cams in to where we know that would be best suited for outright performance, a naturally aspirated engine. Largely due to the valve area at low lift we just spoke about, the 4-valve head responds well to the wider lobe separations than their 2-valve counterparts, meaning we need less overlap to achieve the same result. After some extensive testing, We had these dialed in right where we wanted them and were rewarded with a reasonable drivability after plenty of tune revisions, of course. Not only that, but the peak power no longer flatlined at 6,300 RPM and now skyrocketed past 7,000 to a peak of 7,300 RPM and carried it all the way to the 7,700 limiter. Not only that, but peak torque was achieved at an earlier RPM than the factory cams. The research had paid off, and now we had a really nice cam combo going forward. After running the 12.3 at 112 mph on the unopened Boss 290, I had set my eyes on the quickest time I could find for a naturally aspirated manual GT, which was held by Craig from the old Australian Ford forums as seen in this post from 2008. The car had some fiberglass, bias ply 26x10 slicks, front runners, and a really nice 1.69 60 foot. Sounds like Craig, rest in peace, had bigger balls than I do when it comes to sidestepping the clutch. So I had my work cut out for me with the target being an 1196 or faster. There were a couple of auto cars going quicker at the time, but we're sticking with the manual transmission because it just feels badass ripping gears at 8,000 RPM in a V8. We headed out to the track. Conditions weren't perfect with around 1,550 feet air quality, 0 being ideal and anything less than that considered a bonus. I'll reference the fact that the last time I went out, it was minus 550 feet when I did the 12.3. We reeled off a bunch of 12.2s. Driving the car like I used to with not a lot of RPM on the launch. Eventually I decided to feed it 5,000 RPM on the line and slip the clutch out to preserve the usable RPM. We were rewarded immediately with an 1187 at 117.8 mph on a 1.80 60 foot. 2 years of hard work had come to one moment and I was kinda excited about it. We enjoyed the car for a year or two, did a bunch of events, slayed a lot of cammed LS cars and a few unsuspecting Barras. I also got beat by a lot of faster cars too. We ran some more 11s with more weight in the car, but nothing bettering that 11.8. With the extensive track time racing and a 7700 shift point and occasionally trips to 8,000 over time, led to a planned freshen up of this 170,000 kilometer old Boss 290. It had really fought hard and it deserves some love. Upon teardown, the main bearings were pretty cooked. The crank doesn't like spinning excess of 7,500 RPM for extended periods, and I had done a lot of it. So I got to ordering a rotating assembly. I ended up going with Wiseco 11.1:1 forged pistons. These were drilled for vertical gas ports, which is designed to allow combustion gas to apply pressure to the backside of the top ring for increased cylinder sealing. We went with K1 H-beam rods. I know of a few guys running 1200 wheel horsepower on these, so they should be up to whatever I can throw at it. The cylinder head got a Bren Performance port job, which is myself. Using the stock valves, we have enough airflow for over 600 horsepower now, naturally aspirated. The cams remain the same GTHO grinds, but again on a revised degree for boost. Wink wink. I'll be giving up a little naturally aspirated performance to make more with 20 plus PSI forced into it later. The intake runners were shortened 2 inches, which will improve high RPM breathing at the expense of a little low end, referencing the wave tuning we talked about earlier in the video. The twin 60mm Ford Racing throttle body got a clean up, and we made up a hardline fuel system for it with Bosch 1650cc injectors, twin Walbro 525s, housed in the Tark surge tank, a fuel cooler, and a TurboSmart FPR 2000 fuel regulator. Long story short, a lot of changes happened. I managed to hurt the Stage 5 Mantic single plate pretty early on, so in went an extreme clutch twin plate ceramic, unsprung, all the nasty stuff that makes it hard to launch. So we went down to the drag strip here at Willowbank and had a go on BP98. I had a lot of trouble getting the car off the line with this clutch, and it's completely driver error. I need more seat time in a completely new setup. We were on 245 PSR drag radials here too, and it would spin if I didn't really slip the clutch, which was quite difficult to do with 2 ceramic plates and no supercharger to help me out of the hole. We had 2 runs, the first up being a 12.7 at 116.8 on a 2.48 60 foot. The second run I spun, and have a listen. I was 5 mph down at half track on my usual best, but had pulled all of that mph back by the end of the strip. So I know I'm making a lot more power than before, I just need to get my first half of the track in order. With my usual 60 foot on the old setup of 1.79, we're looking pretty good for an 11.50. It shouldn't be out of reach. I went back one more time, this time with 85 and 28 inch drag radials. Even with the guards rolled, on launch and every shift, the body cut into the tyres significantly and it felt like tapping the brakes. We still went a little better with a 1260 at 117.7, which surprised me again because I had the exhaust on the car, 3/4 of a tank of fuel, heavier wheels, and the shifts were a lot slower with this clutch. So it's safe to say there's a lot more in it, and I'm expecting to go 1150 at 120 plus once I get my first half of the track sorted. So it's back to the drawing board. Likely the Mickey Thompson ET Street Rs that I originally ran the 1187 on will come back. I'll need a car trailer so I can really give it a good go off the line, see if I can get back into the 1.7s, ideally faster, and set a time commensurate to the car's actual performance. This is drag racing after all, and I'd hope it would just go out and run the way that it did, but we can't win every time, and that's okay. The main thing is I had an absolute blast spinning this thing to 8100 RPM, and I get to show you all some pretty cool videos of this 5.4 doing its thing. Stay tuned, and I'll update you all in the next milestone. I appreciate your patience. You guys have been really great. It's been a huge few years for me now. There's a lot of change. It's nice to get back into something I love doing. Thanks to all my friends here. See you again soon.